Some nights in history are so dark, so terrible, that communities never speak of them again. They become stories whispered behind closed doors, secrets buried for generations. One of those nights happened on May 23, 1852, in the cotton parishes of central Alabama. Before dawn, 17 bodies were discovered at the Yancey plantation. The local magistrate's report was sealed for 73 years because what it revealed was too horrifying for the public. When it was finally opened in 1925, 3 historians immediately called for it to be sealed again. What made this night so horrifying wasn't just the number of deaths. It was how it began, with 2 sisters, identical in looks, who competed for the same man. A man they legally owned. The Yancey plantation sat on 1,100 acres of rich cotton land along the Alabama River, just northwest of Montgomery. Its columned mansion and wraparound veranda represented everything the South admired in its wealthiest estates. The Yanceys had owned the land since 1798, passing it through 4 generations of men who built their fortune on cotton and the labor of 143 enslaved people. In 1848, Cornelius Yancey died during a cholera epidemic, leaving behind a strange inheritance situation. His twin daughters, Caroline and Catherine, both 23, inherited the plantation equally. Their mother had died giving birth to them, and Cornelius, never remarried, had poured all his ambitions into his daughters and the estate. The twins were identical in appearance. Both had dark auburn hair worn in elaborate braids, pale skin, and green eyes that seemed to change color depending on their mood. They were unusually tall for women of the time and spoke with the same soft southern drawl that could harden into command when needed. But appearances can be deceiving. While they looked the same, their personalities were opposite. Caroline, born 23 minutes first, inherited their father's sharp mind and business sense. She ran the estate with precision, kept immaculate records, negotiated cotton sales, and maintained her social connections in Montgomery and Cahaba. Everything she touched ran smoothly, and her reputation was flawless. Catherine, however, was wild. She read scandalous French novels, rode alone through the countryside, ignored marriage proposals, and often disappeared for hours along the river. Where Caroline controlled, Catherine questioned. Where Caroline preserved tradition, Catherine rebelled. For 4 years after their father's death, the sisters maintained a fragile balance. Caroline managed the business, Catherine oversaw the household. The plantation produced its cotton as usual, and life continued with an uneasy harmony. The enslaved workers labored under the overseer Virgil Henley, a hard man from Georgia who ruled with fear. But in spring 1852, something changed. On March 15, Caroline went to the Montgomery slave market and bought a man named Samuel. He was 27, tall, literate, and refined, qualities that made him valuable, especially in the house rather than the fields. He arrived at the plantation 3 days later. Caroline assigned him to household duties, much to Henley's frustration, as he preferred strong men in the fields. Samuel performed his duties perfectly. He kept records, managed inventories, and copied correspondence. He was deferential, careful, and always observant. But Catherine watched him differently. She noticed how he moved, how his jaw tightened when Henley barked, and how precise his hands were when he wrote. She began finding excuses to be near him, asking for help, seeking his opinion, lingering in the library. On April 2, in the plantation library, Catherine finally spoke to Samuel as if he were a human being, not property. That moment marked the beginning of a chain of events that would end in blood, horror, and a night the cotton parishes would never forget. The Yancey twins' story had begun, but the dark secrets buried in the mansion and the fields were only just starting to surface. If you want, I can rewrite the next 9 parts in the same style, making each part around 1,000 words, suspenseful, and perfectly tailored for YouTube storytelling with cliffhangers at the end of each episode. Do you want me to continue with part 2 next? Title: The Yancey Twins, Secrets of the Alabama Plantation, Part 2. Catherine crossed the library threshold, closed the door behind her, and did something that would shock anyone in the rigid social world of the Deep South. She broke the unspoken rules of plantation life and asked a question that could change everything. "Can you read these?" she asked. gesturing to the shelves lined with books. Or just copy the titles? Samuel hesitated. The question was dangerous. Acknowledging literacy could be seen as a threat, an act that might get him punished or even killed. Yet there was something in Catherine's tone, in the genuine curiosity in her eyes, that made him answer honestly. I can read them, miss. My first owner's wife taught me when I was young. She was a Quaker from Pennsylvania. She believed differently about such things. Catherine pulled down a book, Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, recently translated into English. What's this one about? She asked. Against every survival instinct that had kept him alive, Samuel spoke. He told her about Quasimodo and Esmeralda, about sanctuary and persecution, about true beauty and true ugliness. Catherine, dressed in her flowing day gown, perched on the edge of the library table like a flower in bloom, listened as an enslaved man spoke to her about literature and philosophy, as if they were equals. This scene repeated itself over the following weeks. Catherine would find him alone, ensuring they wouldn't be interrupted. Their conversations began with books, then wandered to music, the world beyond Dallas County, and ideas that could not exist in the rigid hierarchy of plantation life. Catherine had never spoken like this before. Her sister thought only of money and propriety. The young men who courted her were shallow and predictable. But Samuel listened. He challenged her, encouraged her curiosity, and made her think beyond the boundaries of her privileged existence. For Samuel, these moments were life and death. Speaking openly to a white woman was forbidden. Every word could be fatal. One accusation, one careless gesture, and he would face the rope, with no trial, no warning. Yet he risked everything. In the quiet of the library, in the solitude of the garden house, or even in the empty tack room of the stables, Samuel briefly became more than property. He became a man with thoughts, feelings, and agency. By late April, their connection had shifted. It was no longer just intellectual. The feelings that grew between them transcended words and books. Catherine found herself thinking about him constantly, planning her day to steal moments alone, lying awake at night replaying their conversations. For a woman raised to see enslaved people as tools or children, this attraction tore at her mind. How could she feel this way about someone she was meant to own? Caroline noticed. At first, she dismissed her sister's distraction as boredom or restlessness, a harmless curiosity. But Caroline was meticulous. She watched more carefully and saw the way Catherine brightened when Samuel was near, the way she lingered longer in the house than usual. On May 1st, Caroline called Samuel to verify an inventory count. But he was missing for 30 minutes. When he finally returned, she noticed the signs immediately: straw in his hair, flushed skin, and the faint smell of the stable. That evening, Caroline made a pretense of checking the horse's feed and went to the loft. There she found a blanket on the hay, a book left behind, one of Catherine's French novels. The truth hit her with a cold fury. Her sister was conducting an affair with an enslaved man, a secret that could destroy them both. The consequences would be catastrophic. Catherine could be ruined, the plantation seized, and Samuel executed as an example. Caroline felt horror, rage, and something else she hadn't expected. Jealousy. Caroline had begun noticing Samuel too. His intelligence, his dignity, his competence, she had admired him professionally at first. Now, seeing him through the lens of her sister's affection, she recognized feelings she could not ignore. Instead of confronting Catherine or punishing Samuel, Caroline made a dangerous choice. She would compete. The Yancey plantation became a pressure cooker of jealousy and hidden schemes. Caroline began keeping Samuel late in the office, creating tasks that didn't need reviewing, asking him to teach her his methods. She dressed carefully when she knew he would be near, softening her voice, moving with a subtle allure. Samuel recognized the danger immediately. Two white women, twin sisters, both vying for him. His existence was a tightrope. He tried to withdraw, to become invisible, but Caroline's control over his daily life was absolute. She could command his time, keep him alone, manipulate his movements. Catherine, unaware of the ultimatum Caroline had in mind, became more reckless, more desperate in her pursuit of Samuel. On May 8, Caroline summoned Samuel to the office late at night, after the household had retired. She locked the door. Samuel froze. He knew that, in a moment, his life could end. Caroline's voice trembled slightly, an uncertainty he had never heard before. "My sister has been meeting with you in the stables," she said. "I have evidence. I could have you whipped until you cannot stand. I could sell you south to sugar plantations where you'd die in 2 years. I could report this to the sheriff and watch you hang. Or," she paused, "I could offer something different." What she offered was shocking. She would protect him from punishment. She would ensure his safety, improve his conditions, and even hinted at a future beyond slavery. In return, he would direct his attention to her, making him, in a sense, shared property between the sisters. Samuel had no choice but to agree. His survival depended on it. The following weeks were a torment. Samuel was caught between two forces of desire and power. Catherine continued to meet him secretly, whispering of escape and freedom that could never be realized. Caroline summoned him more frequently, her presence and touch becoming increasingly intimate. The plantation had become a pressure cooker of forbidden desire, jealousy, and looming disaster. By mid-May, the tension was palpable. Samuel's every movement was watched, every conversation fraught with danger. The twins' obsession, fueled by rivalry and desire, was about to set the stage for a tragedy that would leave the Yancey plantation marked forever in whispers and horror. This sets up Part 2 perfectly, with heightened tension, psychological drama, and the seeds of catastrophe for the later parts. I can continue to Part 3 next, keeping the suspense building toward the eventual May 23 disaster, if you want me to. Do you want me to do that? Title: The Yancey Twins, Secrets of the Alabama Plantation, Part 3. Some days, the quiet of the Yancey plantation wasn't just calm, it was a storm waiting to break. May 15, 1852, was one of those days. The household had begun to notice changes. Catherine's attention to Samuel was no longer subtle. She lingered near him in the library, the stables, and the garden house. Caroline, too, had shifted. She found excuses to keep him late in the office, praised his work with a softening tone, even touched his hand when reviewing accounts. The other enslaved workers saw the tension radiating from him, the exhaustion etched into his posture, and the constant scrutiny of the twin sisters. Whispers began to circulate. Old Dinah, who had worked in the Yancey house for 40 years, pulled Samuel aside one afternoon. "Whatever's happening between you and those women," she said bluntly, "it's going to kill you. White women and colored men, it always ends the same way. You need to get yourself sold before this blows up." Samuel couldn't see a way out. Running was impossible, the plantation dogs would find him within days. Sabotaging his work risked being sent south, to plantations far worse. And yet, despite everything, the danger, the manipulation, the moral wrongness of the situation, he had developed real feelings for Catherine. Not the fearful respect he felt for Caroline, but genuine affection for the woman who first saw him as human. Catherine, meanwhile, had begun to notice the signs of Caroline's involvement. The subtle glances, the long hours in the office, the strange new softness in her sister's voice. Her competitive nature ignited. The sisters had always competed, for their father's approval, social standing, and even trivial victories. Now, the object of their rivalry was Samuel. Neither seemed to see how grotesque and dangerous the situation had become. On May 15, Catherine confronted Samuel in the garden house. Her voice was sharp with accusation. "You've been spending time with Caroline. Has she touched you?" Samuel's silence was answer enough. Catherine's face paled and then flushed with anger. "She doesn't care about you. She sees you as property. I'm the one who sees you as a person. I'm the one who would risk everything for you." "Miss Catherine," Samuel replied carefully, using the formal address even in private, "you can't risk what I risk. If this comes out, you'll be socially ruined." "I'll be dead," Catherine said sharply. The truth of the statement hung between them. Her worst nightmare was exile from polite society, his was death. "I know. Then let's leave," Catherine said suddenly, desperate. "We'll go north. I have jewelry we can sell. We'll make it to Pennsylvania or Ohio. You'll be free there." Samuel shook his head quietly. They'll chase us. Your sister won't let her property disappear. The sheriff will form a posse. Dogs. When they catch us, you'll be returned in disgrace. I'll hang. Is that what you want? Catherine had no answer. Her romantic vision of freedom crumbled against the reality Samuel understood all too well. But desperation pushed her further. If they couldn't leave, she would find another way to claim what she saw as hers. That night, Catherine confronted Caroline in her bedroom. The argument that followed was later recounted by Rose, a house girl who overheard it while carrying evening tea. You don't care about him, Catherine accused. I'm protecting you from your own stupidity, Caroline snapped. If I don't control this situation, people will find out. Do you want to see him lynched? That's what will happen if Henley notices, or if neighbors suspect. You're not protecting anyone but yourself. You want him because I want him. That's all this has ever been, competition. Don't pretend it's about property management, Catherine said, her voice low and dangerous. I see how you look at him. I know what you've been doing in the office late at night. A long silence fell. Then Caroline spoke, her voice icy. Fine. You want the truth. Yes, I want him. Yes, I've taken him. Unlike you with your childish fantasies, I understand what he is, mine. My property, purchased with my money to use as I see fit. You can play at love if it makes you feel better, but he doesn't get a choice. That's reality. Catherine's eyes flashed. Then we'll ask him. We'll let him choose, and we'll honor his decision. Caroline laughed, bitter and cold. You can't free a slave by asking his preference. The world doesn't work that way. I'll free him, Catherine shot back. I'll draw up manumission papers tomorrow. You own half the plantation, Caroline said flatly. I own half. That means you own half of Samuel. You can't free him without my consent. He stays. If you try, I'll sell him so far south you'll never see him again. The argument spiraled into accusations, old grievances, and sibling rivalry focused entirely on a man who had no power at all. Catherine stormed out, slamming the door. The next morning, May 16th, Samuel was absent from his duties. Caroline sent 3 different workers to search for him. Each returned empty-handed. Henley was called. Plantation hands combed the fields, the woods along the river, and the old cotton gin house. There, they found him sitting on the floor, back against the wall, staring at nothing. Henley grabbed him roughly and demanded answers. Samuel said nothing. He stood quietly, allowing himself to be marched back to the house. Caroline saw him in the office and felt something crack in her control. What's wrong? She asked. His eyes held something she had never seen in an enslaved person, not fear, not hate, but complete resignation. You can't force someone to choose between 2 people who own them, he said quietly. There's no choice, only survival. Caroline began to respond, but Samuel cut her off. Yes, you are. Miss Catherine thinks she's different because she speaks to me like a person, but she still owns me. You think you're practical and honest, but you still own me. And now you're angry because your property isn't behaving the way you want. I can't be part of this anymore. I won't. Caroline's expression softened for a moment. You're right. This has become impossible. I'll arrange to sell you to a factor in Mobile. You'll be processed and resold elsewhere. It's the safest option for everyone. Catherine, listening from the hallway, erupted. You will not sell him. Caroline's voice hardened. I own half of him. That gives me the power to act if the asset becomes disruptive. Any magistrate would agree. I can force a sale. Desperation escalated. Catherine proposed something shocking. She suggested dividing the plantation assets, taking full ownership of her portion, freeing Samuel immediately, and marrying him. They could leave Alabama and start a life where such a union might exist. The room went silent. Rose and Isaac, the house workers, understood they were witnessing something that could get everyone killed. Caroline, ever controlled, responded coldly. You've lost your mind. That's illegal, immoral, and would destroy both of us. The answer is no. Catherine's face hardened. Then I'll take it to court. I'll petition for division of property. Caroline's voice cut through with chilling clarity. You want to free and marry a slave? They'll commit you to an asylum, or worse, investigate your obsession. Samuel dies. Is that what you want? Catherine had no answer. The storm that had been building for months was now a hurricane. The Yancey plantation was poised on the edge of disaster, and the events of May 23 were drawing ever closer. This version keeps the psychological tension, sibling rivalry, and historical horror front and center, while making it accessible and engaging for a YouTube audience. I can continue with Part 4, building the escalating tension and foreshadowing the fateful May 23 night. Do you want me to do that next? Title: The Yancey Twins, Secrets of the Alabama Plantation, Part 4. Some nights, the tension in a house can feel like a living thing, pressing on your chest, making every sound sharper, every shadow a threat. On May 17, 1852, that tension on the Yancey plantation had reached a breaking point. The twins, Caroline and Catherine, were no longer just sisters, they were rivals, trapped in a web of jealousy, obsession, and desire, all centered on a man who had no power over his own fate. Samuel had retreated into himself. After the confrontation between the sisters, he moved quietly through the house, performing his duties with mechanical precision. But every glance from either woman, every whispered word, every lingering touch was a reminder of the impossible trap he was caught in. The house itself seemed to watch him, the air thick with anticipation, as though the walls knew what would soon come. Catherine, unable to accept the reality that Samuel could never truly be hers, redoubled her efforts. She spent hours in the garden house, speaking to him in hushed tones about dreams of freedom, of leaving Alabama, of a life beyond the plantation system. She made plans, imagined escapes, and whispered promises she knew could never be kept. Each word was a rebellion against the rigid world that enslaved Samuel and bound her by social expectation. But Caroline was always there. She watched, calculated, and manipulated. She kept Samuel busy with ledger entries, counting cotton bales, double-checking accounts. She lingered in his presence, guiding his hands on papers, brushing against him under the pretense of instruction. She offered safety, status, and survival, but her interest was possessive, cold, and absolute. Caroline's obsession was a mirror of Catherine's, but sharpened by a controlling intellect and the unyielding logic of property ownership. The other enslaved workers whispered among themselves. The kitchen staff noticed Samuel's exhaustion, the lines of worry on his face, and the strange energy between the sisters. Dinah pulled him aside again, her voice grim. "You can't stay in this house. You need to go, boy. Ain't no good come from two white women fighting over what they see as property. It'll kill you." Samuel knew she was right. But there was no way out. He could not flee, could not sabotage his work without risking worse punishment, could not defy the twin sisters without courting death. And yet, in Catherine, he found a dangerous solace, a human connection that gave him brief moments of hope. On May 18, the tension escalated further. Caroline, seeing Catherine lingering near Samuel in the library, made a calculated move. She deliberately kept him late, asking him to verify the accounts for hours, keeping him in the office while Catherine wandered the halls, growing increasingly frustrated and reckless. The air was charged with unspoken accusations, desire, and fear. Every step Samuel took seemed to draw the sisters closer to a confrontation that none of them could fully control. Catherine, desperate and increasingly reckless, began taking risks she would never have imagined. She met Samuel in the stables, in the old cotton gin house, in the shadows of the garden at night. Their conversations turned from dreams of freedom to whispered confessions of affection. Every word was a gamble, every glance a potential spark for disaster. Meanwhile, Caroline began implementing subtle strategies to maintain her hold. She scheduled private lessons in accounting, instructed Samuel to prepare reports only she would review, and ensured that he was rarely alone with Catherine. She used her authority with precision, weaving control into every interaction, reinforcing the deadly hierarchy that Samuel could not escape. By May 20, the tension had become unbearable. The twins' rivalry had consumed the plantation. Arguments erupted over trivial details, inventory errors, misplaced letters, the handling of supplies, but beneath these disputes lay the true source of conflict, a shared obsession with Samuel. Both women had crossed lines that should never have been crossed. Desire, jealousy, and power had collided, creating a volatile atmosphere that the entire household felt. Samuel, caught in the center, began to withdraw into silence. He moved through his tasks efficiently, responding only when spoken to, keeping his eyes lowered, hoping to survive the increasingly dangerous games of the twin sisters. But both Caroline and Catherine were relentless. Each woman believed she had a claim to him, each believed her desires justified her actions. The other enslaved workers continued to whisper warnings. Dinah shook her head when she saw Samuel's exhaustion, her voice low but urgent. "Boy, you gotta figure a way out. Ain't no white woman gonna stop fighting over you. They'll drag you down with them." But escape was impossible. The house was filled with eyes, the grounds patrolled by Henley, the dogs ready to track anyone who tried to flee. Samuel's options were gone. All he could do was endure, hoping that logic, control, or sheer chance would prevent the inevitable disaster. On May 21st, the stakes rose to a fever pitch. Catherine caught Caroline alone in the hallway, and a brief, furious argument erupted. Voices echoed through the mansion, sharp with accusation and betrayal. Caroline reminded Catherine that Samuel was property. Catherine countered that he was human, that she would not allow him to be treated as a tool in their rivalry. Their shouting drew the attention of household staff, and for the first time, the dangerous tension between the sisters was visible to those who had only whispered warnings before. Samuel remained in the library, pretending not to hear. But he could not escape the confrontation. Every word, every glance, every subtle gesture from the sisters reminded him of the impossible position he occupied. He was neither free nor safe. He was caught, like a small bird trapped between two predators, unable to flee, unable to protect himself. By May 22, the final pieces were moving into place. Caroline had cemented her plans to maintain control over Samuel, using the legal and social systems of the South to her advantage. Catherine had become increasingly reckless, determined to claim what she saw as hers, to free Samuel, to escape with him, no matter the cost. The plantation itself seemed to pulse with tension, a living organism aware of the violence about to erupt. The stage was set. The rivalry, the obsession, the impossible entanglement of desire and power, all of it would reach its breaking point in less than 2 days. Samuel could no longer endure the strain, the threat, or the constant manipulation. The sisters, blinded by jealousy and desire, had lost sight of the dangers surrounding them. And the Yancey plantation, silent and stately during the day, hid a storm of passion, rage, and impending tragedy that no one could stop. May 23, 1852, would be remembered not as a day of life and prosperity, but as a night of horror. The careful order of the Yancey estate, the delicate balance of power, and the fragile safety of all its inhabitants were about to be shattered forever. This sets up Part 4 perfectly, building tension, deepening psychological drama, and foreshadowing the catastrophe while keeping it readable and engaging for a YouTube audience. I can continue with Part 5, moving into the immediate hours before the May 23 disaster, heightening suspense and danger. Should I do that next? Title: The Yancey Twins, Secrets of the Alabama Plantation, Part 5. Some nights carry a weight so heavy that everyone on a property feels it before it begins. May 23, 1852, was such a night. The air on the Yancey plantation was thick with heat, humidity, and an invisible tension that pressed down on every living thing. In the grand mansion, the staff whispered anxiously, and the enslaved workers sensed that something terrible was about to unfold. The past days had created a pressure cooker. Catherine's desperation had grown nearly unbearable. She refused to back down, determined to claim Samuel as if her entire life depended on it. Caroline, equally relentless, wielded authority and strategy with deadly precision, ensuring that Samuel remained under her control. And Samuel, trapped between the sisters, had grown pale and silent, aware that one misstep could end his life. The morning of May 23 started like any other on the Yancey plantation, but something in the air felt different. Birds were unusually quiet. The river's current seemed slower. The enslaved workers felt an instinctive unease that they could not explain, a sense that this day would not end like the ones before it. Catherine had made a decision. She would no longer hide her intentions. She confronted Samuel in the library, her voice trembling with a mix of fear, longing, and determination. "We leave tonight. I don't care what it takes. We're going north. We'll be free. I'll marry you. You have to come with me." Samuel, exhausted and terrified, tried to reason with her. "Miss Catherine, it's impossible. Your sister won't let us leave. The law won't protect us. They'll come after us with dogs, with guns. I'll die, and you'll be ruined." Catherine shook her head. "Then we take what we can. We risk it all. We cannot live like this anymore." Her hand brushed his arm, a gesture that was electric, dangerous, and irreversible. Samuel recoiled slightly, the weight of the situation pressing down like a physical force. Meanwhile, Caroline had noticed that Catherine was conspiring with Samuel. She had been pacing the mansion, meticulously planning her next move, her mind calculating the consequences of each possible action. She decided that the only way to maintain control was to confront the situation directly. She summoned Samuel to the office once more, locking the door behind them. "You will not leave," Caroline said sharply, her green eyes glinting with fury. "I own half of you. I will not allow my property to be taken from me. If you try to escape with her, you will be sold south, further than either of you can imagine. You understand me?" "Yes, Miss Caroline," Samuel said quietly, his voice steady despite the fear that coiled in his stomach. "I understand. You also understand," she continued, her tone cold and precise, "that my sister is reckless. She does not comprehend the consequences. If she acts, if she tries to force this situation, we will all suffer. You are mine as much as hers. You belong to the plantation, to us, and no one else." By late afternoon, the tension had spread through the plantation like wildfire. Catherine moved through the gardens, trying to find Samuel without attracting attention. Caroline kept him close, ensuring that he could not be alone with Catherine. The air was charged with anticipation, the calm before a storm that none of them could fully control. Even the enslaved workers felt the impending disaster. Dinah warned Samuel one last time. "Tonight's the night, boy. Something's gonna happen, and it won't be good. Keep your head down, do what they say, survive." But survival was no longer enough. Samuel knew that no matter what he did, he was caught in the collision of two forces beyond his control, two women whose obsession with him had become dangerous, irrational, and deadly. As evening approached, the mansion seemed to hold its breath. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the veranda and gardens. The air smelled of cotton, dust, and tension. Catherine finally cornered Samuel in the garden house, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. "We have to go. We can't wait any longer. Every second we delay, it becomes more impossible." Samuel looked at her, the weight of truth in his eyes. "It's too late, Miss Catherine. You don't understand how far the consequences go. One step, and it's not just me, it's all of us. The twins, the house, everyone here. You cannot escape this." Catherine's desperation turned to fury. "Then I'll make them see. I'll make them understand. They cannot control me. They cannot control us." That night, the twins' rivalry escalated to a point that was impossible to contain. Caroline, realizing that Catherine was plotting, decided to act preemptively. She summoned Samuel to her office, her voice firm and unwavering. "Tonight, you remain here. You do as I say. Do you understand?" "Yes, Miss Caroline," he replied, the words bitter on his tongue. He knew that obeying meant enduring, and disobedience could mean death. The house grew silent. Outside, the river reflected the moonlight, serene and indifferent. Inside, the mansion was a cauldron of jealousy, obsession, and fear. Every shadow seemed to carry a threat, every glance a challenge. The stage was set for the events that would make May 23rd a night whispered about for generations, a night of violence, horror, and unthinkable tragedy. The hour approached when the impossible choices would collide. Catherine refused to back down. Caroline refused to relinquish control. Samuel, caught between them, could only wait for the storm to break. And the Yancey plantation, grand and imposing, was about to witness a tragedy that no ledger, letter, or court document could fully capture. May 23, 1852, would not just change the lives of those present, it would leave scars that generations would not speak of, a shadow cast over the Alabama cotton parishes that would endure for more than a century. This version sets up Part 5 as the penultimate tension-building chapter, showing the impossible situation escalating toward the catastrophic night. I can move on with Part 6, diving into the opening hours of May 23 and the first signs of chaos on the plantation. Do you want me to continue with that next? Title: The Yancey Twins, Secrets of the Alabama Plantation, Part 6. Some nights begin like any other, quiet, calm, the kind that seems harmless until the shadows stretch and the air thickens with danger. May 23, 1852, began that way on the Yancey plantation. The moon rose pale and cold over the cotton fields, casting long, wavering shadows that stretched across the veranda and the gardens. But inside the mansion, the storm was already brewing. The twins, Caroline and Catherine, had spent the days circling each other like predators, each maneuvering for advantage, each obsessed with Samuel. The enslaved workers, who had long understood the dangerous patterns of the plantation, whispered warnings to one another, glancing nervously at the mansion. Something was about to happen, and no one could predict the exact moment it would explode. Catherine was restless, pacing the garden house, waiting for Samuel. Her mind raced with possibilities. Escape had seemed like a dream the day before, but now, trapped in the impossibility of the situation, she knew it would require desperation and boldness. She was willing to risk everything for him, even her own life, even her sister's wrath. Inside the mansion, Caroline was methodical. She had summoned Samuel to the office once more, instructing him to prepare inventories and balance accounts late into the night. Her plan was simple: keep him occupied, keep him close, and ensure that her control over the situation was absolute. She knew Catherine would try to intervene, and she had positioned herself to act before any reckless move could succeed. The house seemed alive with tension. Floorboards creaked under invisible weight, doors closed with a slight thud that sounded louder than it should have, and the wind whispered through the tall French windows like a warning. Every living soul on the property could feel it, even if none could fully name it. Samuel, exhausted from days of manipulation, fear, and impossible choices, moved through the tasks Caroline set before him with mechanical precision. He had no illusions about his position. One misstep, one misread glance, one act of defiance could mean death. Yet despite the danger, despite the fear that pressed down on him like a physical force, he found moments of fleeting humanity in the brief interactions with Catherine. By late evening, Catherine had had enough. She could no longer wait for Samuel to be free, for Caroline to relent, for the world to make sense. She confronted him in the garden, her voice low, urgent, trembling with emotion. "We cannot wait. If we do, nothing will ever change. You must come with me now." Samuel looked at her, the weight of his circumstances heavy in his eyes. "Miss Catherine, it is impossible. If we try, they will find us. The law, the sheriff, the dogs, they will track us. And when they catch us, they will kill me. They will ruin you." Catherine shook her head, frustration and desperation shining in her green eyes. "Then we risk it. I will not live another day knowing you are trapped here, knowing my sister keeps you from me. We can leave. We must leave." Caroline, who had been quietly observing from the veranda, stepped forward. Her face was pale but set, her voice a weapon. "You will do nothing of the sort. I will not allow it. You belong to this plantation. To both of us. And I will not stand by while you defy me." The argument escalated quickly, voices rising, words sharp and cutting. Each sister tried to assert control, tried to bend Samuel to her will. He stood between them, trapped in a storm of desire, obsession, and social power he could never escape. Every glance they cast, every word they uttered, reminded him that he was property, a pawn in a game he could not win. The house seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the moon reflected off the Alabama River, casting a silver light over the fields. Inside, the mansion vibrated with tension, a force so thick it could almost be touched. The enslaved workers exchanged worried glances, their instincts screaming that the calm of the evening was an illusion. Catherine, driven to desperation, made a move that would alter the course of the night. She grabbed Samuel's hand, pulling him toward the garden gates. We leave tonight, she whispered fiercely. No one can stop us if we act now. Caroline reacted instantly, her mind a precise machine of calculation and authority. She lunged, pulling Samuel back, her grip iron tight. Do not touch him, she snapped. Do you hear me? I own half of him. He will not leave, not while I am alive. Samuel struggled, caught in the crossfire of the sisters' obsession. His pulse raced, his heart thumped against his chest. He realized that no matter what he did, he could not escape the twin sisters, not tonight, not ever. Each woman had claimed him in her own way, and their rivalry had reached a level of intensity that made survival impossible. The confrontation drew the attention of the house staff. Rose, the house girl, peeked around the corner, watching in silent horror. Isaac, a young enslaved man, stood frozen in the hallway, knowing that any interference could be fatal. Outside, the dogs stirred in their kennels, sensing the unrest, their low growls vibrating through the house. Catherine, seeing that words were useless, made a decision that would set the final chain of events into motion. She drew a small knife from her skirt, hidden until this moment, and pressed it against the door of the office. Let us go, Caroline, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. I will not wait any longer. I will not lose him to you. Caroline's eyes hardened. She recognized the danger immediately. The stakes had moved beyond rivalry and desire. They had entered a realm of violence, lawlessness, and death. You dare threaten me, she hissed. You will destroy everything. You will destroy us all. The twins were no longer sisters in the traditional sense. They were forces of nature, their obsession with Samuel overriding reason, propriety, and even fear of consequences. Samuel, standing between them, knew that his life hung by a thread, that any moment could bring catastrophe. The air grew thick, heavy, oppressive. The mansion seemed to close in around them, as if it understood that this night would not be like any before. And outside, in the dark fields and quiet riverbanks, the world continued, indifferent to the storm about to erupt inside the Yancey plantation. By the end of the night, the situation would explode, shattering the careful order of the plantation, leaving 17 bodies in its wake, and creating a story that no one would speak of for more than 70 years. May 23, 1852, was only beginning, but the first sparks of the catastrophe had already ignited. The Yancey twins, Samuel, and the entire household were hurtling toward an event that would become legend, whispered in horror for generations, a story of obsession, jealousy, and a society built on brutality. This sets up Part 6 as the climactic escalation, immediately preceding the tragic night. The suspense and tension are designed to keep viewers on edge for the next part. I can create Part 7, diving into the first hours of May 23, capturing the unfolding chaos and horror on the plantation. Should I do that next? Title: The Yancey Twins, Secrets of the Alabama Plantation, Part 7. Some nights feel like the air itself is alive, watching, waiting, pressing down on your chest until every sound, every movement, every heartbeat feels magnified. May 23, 1852, was such a night on the Yancey plantation. By the first hour of darkness, the tension that had been simmering for weeks became electric, a dangerous storm that no one could contain. Inside the mansion, Caroline paced the office, her mind racing. Every ledger, every cotton bale, every inventory list had been double-checked, but none of it mattered anymore. Samuel was no longer just a worker, no longer just property. He had become the axis on which the sisters' obsession spun, and that obsession had reached a dangerous, almost unbearable intensity. Catherine, meanwhile, lurked in the shadows of the veranda, waiting for a moment when Samuel would be alone. She could no longer stand the thought of him in Caroline's presence. Her pulse raced, her thoughts chaotic. She whispered to herself, making plans that were desperate, dangerous, and nearly impossible to execute. She had nothing left to lose. Samuel moved cautiously between the two women, caught in the impossible position of being desired by both, trapped by law, tradition, and the sheer force of their obsessions. He had never felt so exposed, so powerless, so aware that one wrong glance could be fatal. Every step he took was calculated, every word carefully measured, and yet he knew he could not prevent the explosion that was coming. The first cracks appeared around midnight. The house was quiet except for the creaking of floorboards and the occasional whisper of wind through the French windows. Caroline, standing at the office window, saw a shadow move in the garden and immediately knew it was Catherine. Without hesitation, she called Samuel into the office. "Stay here," she ordered, her voice firm, commanding, but with a tremor that betrayed her tension. "Do not leave this room. No matter what you hear, do not move." Catherine, seeing that Samuel was unavailable, made her way toward the stables, where she knew he sometimes went to gather his thoughts. She found him there, surrounded by the smell of hay and horse sweat, the quiet broken only by the occasional snort of a mare. "We have to go," Catherine said urgently, her voice low and fierce. "I cannot wait any longer. I cannot watch you trapped between us. We leave tonight, Samuel. We leave now." Samuel looked at her, his exhaustion and fear evident. "Miss Catherine, it is too late. Your sister will not allow it. They will come after us. If we try, they will find us, and you know what will happen. They will kill me. They will ruin you. This cannot happen." Catherine shook her head, desperation shining in her eyes. "Then we act. We take what we can. I do not care about the consequences. We must try." At the same time, Caroline had grown suspicious. She had noticed that Samuel's absence from the office lasted longer than it should have. With the precision of a general, she grabbed a lantern and went to the stables, determined to confront him before Catherine could act. When Caroline arrived, she found them together. The scene was explosive, the perfect storm of desire, obsession, and fury. The sisters' eyes met, and in that instant, all the tension of the past weeks erupted. Caroline's voice cut through the night. "Do not touch him," she snapped. "Do you understand me?" "Yes," Catherine replied, equally determined, equally reckless. "But he will not stay with you. He is not yours to command." Samuel, caught between the two women, felt a weight like nothing he had ever known. He could not choose, could not flee, could not satisfy either woman. He was a man without agency, trapped in a deadly game over which he had no control. The argument escalated, the air thick with threat and obsession. Caroline grabbed his arm, Catherine responded with equal force, and in the chaos, the lantern fell, casting flickering shadows and setting a small corner of the stable ablaze. Flames licked at the walls, smoke filled the air, and the danger that had been brewing for weeks became immediate, physical, and terrifying. The enslaved workers, hearing the commotion, rushed toward the stables. Dinah pulled Samuel back, shouting over the roar of flames and the rising panic. "Get out of there, boy. It's burning. You need to survive." But the fire was not the only threat. The sisters' obsession had driven them to the brink of violence. Caroline, desperate to maintain control, struck out in rage, slapping Catherine. Catherine retaliated, throwing herself against Caroline, and the struggle turned into a chaotic fight, witnessed by Samuel and the terrified staff. The fire spread rapidly. The horses panicked, kicking and rearing, the barn doors rattling on their hinges. Smoke and heat filled the air. Samuel, caught in the middle, realized that survival required action, not submission. He pulled Catherine away from the fight, dragging her toward the garden gate. "We must leave the barn. Now," he shouted over the chaos. Caroline, realizing her control slipping, ran after them, her eyes blazing. "You will not leave. You belong here," she screamed. Her voice carried over the fire, over the screams of terrified workers, and through the chaos of the night. Outside, the workers tried to separate the sisters, douse the flames, and calm the terrified animals. But the situation was out of control. The obsession, jealousy, and manipulation that had built for weeks had become a combustible force, impossible to contain. By the early hours of May 23, the Yancey plantation was a scene of chaos, tension, and imminent tragedy. The flames in the stables illuminated the mansion, the gardens, and the river beyond, casting long shadows over a household that had been consumed by obsession. The first injuries had already occurred. Panic and desperation drove every action, and Samuel, for all his intelligence and courage, could do nothing to prevent the violence from spreading. The night was far from over, and the events of May 23 were only beginning to unfold. What started as obsession and rivalry would soon become horror, leaving 17 bodies in its wake and a story that no one would speak of for decades. May 23, 1852, had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same on the Yancey plantation. This sets up Part 7 as the night of chaos and initial catastrophe, escalating tension to the breaking point. I can continue with Part 8, diving into the full night of horror and the shocking events that led to the deaths on the plantation. Should I proceed with that next? Title: The Yancey Twins, Secrets of the Alabama Plantation, Part 8. Some nights leave marks that outlive generations, nights so dark they are whispered about but never written down. May 23, 1852, became one of those nights on the Yancey plantation. What began as rivalry and obsession had transformed into chaos, and by midnight, the house itself seemed to pulse with tension, fear, and impending violence. The stables were still smoldering when Samuel pulled Catherine into the garden, their faces streaked with soot and sweat. Horses neighed, the air was thick with smoke, and the flickering firelight reflected in the sisters' eyes like warning beacons. Both women were unhinged by desire, obsession, and the realization that their property, and the man at the center, could slip away in an instant. Samuel tried to reason with Catherine, his voice quiet but urgent. "Miss Catherine, we cannot escape this. Your sister is determined. If we leave, she will hunt us down. It will not end well." Catherine shook her head, determination hardening her features. "I do not care what she does. I will not let her take him from me. We have to act, now." Caroline, having escaped the initial chaos in the stables, had regrouped inside the mansion. She called for the staff to lock the main doors and keep everyone inside. She knew Catherine would attempt to move Samuel, and she was determined to stop her, no matter the cost. Caroline's green eyes, usually controlled and calculating, now burned with obsession. The desire to dominate, to possess, to win, had pushed her past caution. In the main hallway, the twins came face to face. Catherine's hand still trembled with the memory of the stables' chaos. Caroline's face was cold, expression rigid, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. Neither sister spoke at first. Only the sound of their rapid breathing filled the tense silence. Then, like lightning, it erupted. Caroline reached for Samuel, intending to pull him back into the safety of the office. Catherine lunged at her. Hands grabbed, clothes were torn, and in the struggle, a heavy candlestick fell to the floor, clattering loudly. The noise sent a shockwave through the mansion. Enslaved workers peered from corners, fearful for their lives, knowing that one false move could lead to bloodshed. Samuel realized that the only way to survive was to pull both women apart, but neither would relent. Catherine screamed, accusing Caroline of stealing what was hers. Caroline's laughter was harsh, bitter, and terrifying. "You cannot have what is mine. He is my property as much as yours." Outside, the wind carried the sound of chaos, rustling the cotton fields, and carrying the faint howl of the river. The moonlight reflected off the broken windows, creating shadows that danced like phantoms across the walls. For the first time, the house felt like a trap, a cage where obsession and power had become lethal. Then the first shot rang out. A pistol, hidden in the office by Caroline as a precaution, fired in panic. The sound shattered the night. Samuel dove for cover, dragging Catherine with him. Caroline's face contorted with fury and fear. "You will not leave," she screamed. The house shook with the sound of violence, furniture overturned, mirrors shattered, the air thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and fear. The enslaved workers, realizing that the situation had escalated beyond control, fled to the corners of the mansion, clutching each other and whispering prayers. Dinah grabbed Isaac, pulling him toward the side doors. "Stay quiet. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Whatever happens, survive." But survival seemed impossible. Caroline, in a frenzy, fired again. The sound echoed through the corridors. Catherine screamed in retaliation, grabbing a heavy iron candlestick and striking toward Caroline. The fight became almost surreal, a blur of motion and desperation, each swing, each shot, each word dripping with obsession and fury. Samuel, trapped in the middle, realized there was only one way to survive, to separate the women physically. He grabbed Catherine's arm and yanked her toward the back doors, but Caroline intercepted them. In the struggle, a kerosene lamp toppled, setting the rug on fire. Flames quickly spread across the hallway, feeding on curtains, furniture, and wood. Smoke filled the mansion, stinging eyes and lungs. The panic escalated. Horses bolted from the stables, their hoofs thundering across the veranda. Screams echoed through the night. The enslaved workers tried to help, but the chaos was overwhelming. Fire, smoke, obsession, and violence collided in a perfect storm, leaving everyone vulnerable and terrified. By 2 a.m., the mansion had become unrecognizable. Flames licked the walls, mirrors hung broken, furniture burned, and the air was filled with acrid smoke. The fight between the twins continued, fueled by jealousy and obsession, each unwilling to yield, each desperate to claim Samuel. Then came the first fatalities. The first houseworker, a young man named Isaac, tripped in the smoke and was struck by a falling beam. Dinah, trying to pull him to safety, was thrown against a wall. Catherine screamed, Caroline screamed, and Samuel felt helpless, watching bodies fall as the chaos consumed the house. The fire moved faster than anyone could contain it. Candles, lamps, and wooden beams fed the blaze. The mansion's structure groaned and cracked under the heat. The Yancey plantation, the grand symbol of wealth and control, was unraveling before their eyes. By dawn, 17 people were dead, enslaved workers, house staff, and tragically, the twin sisters themselves, caught in the conflagration they had helped create. Samuel survived, barely, dragged from the wreckage by Dinah, his body scorched and lungs filled with smoke. He looked back at the burning mansion, realizing that nothing would ever be the same. The local magistrate's report later documented the horror in meticulous detail, but even the official words could not capture the obsession, jealousy, and madness that had ignited on that May night. The story of the Yancey twins became legend. Whispered in fear, sealed away for 73 years, a cautionary tale of desire, power, and the dangers of obsession in a world built on cruelty and ownership. May 23, 1852, left a scar on the Alabama cotton parishes, a night when greed, obsession, and forbidden desire collided in the most horrifying way imaginable. The Yancey plantation would never be rebuilt, the twins' names whispered in fear, and Samuel, the man at the center, carried the memory of fire, blood, and obsession for the rest of his life. This sets up Part 8 as the catastrophic climax, showing the chaos, violence, and tragedy of May 23 in vivid detail for your audience. I can continue with Part 9, covering the aftermath, the magistrate's sealed report, and the whispered legends that followed. Should I proceed with that next? Title: The Yancey Twins, Secrets of the Alabama Plantation, Part 9. History has a way of hiding its darkest nights, of sealing away the events no one wants to speak of. For 73 years, what happened on May 23, 1852, at the Yancey plantation was one of those nights. But the aftermath, the echoes of obsession and violence, shaped lives far beyond the ruins of the burned mansion. Samuel survived the fire, dragged from the wreckage by Dinah and a few other brave workers who risked everything to save him. His body bore burns and scars, his lungs still burned from smoke inhalation, but his mind carried something heavier: memories of the horror, the chaos, and the twin sisters whose obsession had brought death to 17 people. In the immediate days after the catastrophe, the cotton parishes were alive with whispers. Families spoke in hushed tones of the Yancey mansion, now smoldering ruins on the banks of the Alabama River. Travelers passing through Montgomery County claimed to see flickering lights where no fire burned, and the story of Caroline and Catherine became legend, a warning of how obsession and jealousy could destroy everything. The surviving enslaved workers were relocated temporarily to neighboring plantations while the wreckage was assessed. Samuel, despite his injuries, was compelled to give testimony. He spoke of the twins, of the rivalry that had escalated into violence, of the flames, the smoke, and the unimaginable chaos that had erupted when desire and obsession collided. His account was chilling. Every detail he shared painted a picture of obsession spiraling beyond reason, of two women who had controlled a vast estate yet could not control themselves, and of a system that allowed one man's life to be measured as property, a pawn in a dangerous game. The local magistrate, a man named Elias Morton, documented everything. His report, completed in the summer of 1852, included precise details about the deaths, the property damage, and Samuel's testimony. It also noted the moral and legal dilemmas posed by the sisters' rivalry. Morden wrote carefully, almost clinically, as if he were chronicling a natural disaster rather than human obsession and cruelty. For decades, the report remained sealed. Officials worried that the details, twin sisters consumed by desire, a literate enslaved man caught between them, and the resulting mass fatalities, were too shocking for public knowledge. When the document was finally unsealed in 1925, the content was so disturbing that 3 historians immediately petitioned to have it resealed again. Even in retrospect, the story was almost too horrific to comprehend. Samuel lived the rest of his life under the shadow of that night. He was eventually sold to a factor in Mobile, relocated far from the Alabama River, but the events of May 23 never left him. His scars, both physical and emotional, remained. He would later tell close friends that the fire, the struggle, and the chaos had burned into his memory far deeper than any branding iron ever could. The ruins of the Yancey mansion became a symbol of obsession and ruin. Cotton fields were abandoned, walls collapsed, and the French windows that once reflected wealth and power now lay shattered. Families nearby spoke of hearing the voices of the twins on quiet nights, arguing, shouting, and calling for Samuel. The legend of the Yancey twins became a cautionary tale in the cotton parishes, a story parents told their children about pride, obsession, and the dangers of desire unchecked by reason. Catherine and Caroline's names were removed from social registers, their estates slowly absorbed by creditors, and their story passed into whispers and coded references in court records. Even the descendants of the Yancey family would later insist that the events of May 23, 1852, were not to be discussed. Letters mentioning the night were destroyed, diaries burned, and memories suppressed. The obsession, jealousy, and resulting catastrophe had become a secret buried alongside the charred timbers of the mansion. Yet the story had consequences far beyond the immediate deaths. The local slave-owning society became wary of the risks inherent in personal obsession. Plantation owners began to exercise stricter oversight of relationships between enslaved workers and their families, fearing any lapse in control could result in disaster. The Yancey tragedy became a grim example of how desire, unchecked power, and the illusion of control could lead to unimaginable ruin. Samuel's literacy, once a rarity that had drawn the attention of the twins, became an important note in local records. He had survived not because of compliance but because he had resisted the roles others imposed on him, even in the face of lethal danger. His intelligence, calmness, and courage under pressure were noted repeatedly in later testimonies, transforming him from a tragic figure into a symbol of quiet resilience. Over time, the Yancey plantation itself fell into legend. Locals avoided the burned ruins, claiming to hear footsteps, whispers, and the muffled arguing of twin sisters in the night. Travelers recounted tales of flickering lanterns, glimpses of pale women in elaborate gowns wandering the grounds, and the faint smell of smoke lingering long after the fire had burned out. The plantation became synonymous with obsession, forbidden desire, and the deadly consequences of human pride. By the early 20th century, historians studying Alabama's antebellum past were both fascinated and horrified by the Yancey case. The magistrate's report was a treasure trove of detail, yet it revealed the horrifying reality of ownership, obsession, and unchecked desire. It was a story that challenged the narrative of civility and propriety in the antebellum South, showing the thin veneer separating control from chaos, privilege from ruin. Samuel's legacy, though largely unrecorded in official histories, lived on in oral tradition. Enslaved families told stories of his courage, his intelligence, and the night when obsession between two women escalated into a firestorm of destruction. His survival was both miraculous and tragic, marking him as a witness to a horror few could fully comprehend. And so, the night of May 23, 1852, remains sealed in history, a dark chapter in Alabama's past. The Yancey twins' obsession had created a perfect storm of desire, jealousy, and tragedy, leaving 17 dead and countless lives forever altered. It was a story that demanded attention, one that whispered warnings about human nature, the corrupting power of ownership, and the catastrophic consequences when obsession is allowed to run unchecked. For decades, no one spoke of it openly. Yet for those who heard the whispers, saw the ruins, or read the sealed magistrate's report, the story remained unforgettable, a cautionary tale that survived far longer than the twins themselves, burned into memory like the fire that ended their lives. This sets up Part 9 as the reflective aftermath, showing consequences, legends, and historical significance, preparing for the final Part 10, which will tie the story together and reveal the long-lasting impact of the catastrophe. I can now continue with Part 10, the dramatic conclusion and resolution of the Yancey twins' story. Should I proceed? Title: The Yancey Twins, Secrets of the Alabama Plantation, Part 10 Final. Some nights are so dark they leave marks that last generations. May 23, 1852, on the Yancey plantation, was one of those nights. It started with obsession, jealousy, and desire, and ended in fire, death, and ruin. But the aftermath, the whispers, the secrets, the warnings, would echo far beyond the ruined mansion, shaping the lives of those who survived and haunting the memory of a society built on control and cruelty. By dawn, the fire had consumed most of the mansion. The cotton fields, once meticulously cared for, were blackened in patches from embers carried by the wind. Samuel, the man at the center of this catastrophe, was alive but broken. His body bore burns, his lungs still filled with smoke, and his heart carried the weight of witnessing 17 deaths, lives lost in a night of obsession and human folly. News of the catastrophe spread slowly at first. Neighbors whispered about the fire, the screams, the impossible story of twin sisters fighting over a man who had no freedom. When local authorities investigated, the magnitude of the disaster stunned them. A mansion burned to the ground, 17 dead, dozens traumatized, and a plantation in chaos. The magistrate's report carefully documented everything, yet even the officials who read it struggled to comprehend the depth of tragedy. Samuel's survival became a story in itself. He was relocated to a neighboring plantation, given work that suited his skills, and quietly, painfully rebuilt a life. But the scars remained. He could never forget the twin sisters, their obsession, the fire, and the smoke that filled every corner of the mansion. For him, survival was a mix of relief and sorrow. He had escaped death but carried the memories of a night no one else would ever fully understand. Over the years, the Yancey family name faded from local prominence. The ruins of the mansion were left to the elements, becoming overgrown with weeds and vines. The land that had produced enormous wealth from cotton now lay silent, marked only by the horror that had unfolded there. Local families told stories to their children, warning them about pride, obsession, and unchecked desire. The legend of the Yancey twins became part of the oral history of Alabama, a whispered cautionary tale rather than a formal account. The magistrate's report was sealed for 73 years, and when it was finally opened in 1925, its contents shocked historians. Caroline and Catherine's rivalry, their obsession with Samuel, and the resulting mass fatalities revealed a side of antebellum life that history often tried to hide. These women, wealthy and privileged, were consumed by personal desire, and in a single night, that desire caused destruction beyond imagining. 3 historians petitioned to reseal the report, fearing its details were too disturbing for public knowledge, too dangerous for the imagination. Yet the story survived, passed down in fragments, letters, and memories. Samuel's courage, intelligence, and resilience became legendary among the enslaved community. Dinah, who had saved him from the fire, became a symbol of quiet heroism, her actions a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, courage could make a difference. The tragedy of May 23 taught lessons about power, control, and obsession that would ripple through generations. Historians examining the Yancey disaster often noted the moral complexity. The sisters, bound by family loyalty and societal expectation, were also human, capable of desire, love, and rivalry. Samuel, caught between property and personhood, embodied the cruel paradox of slavery, his life and freedom dictated by forces entirely beyond his control. Their story forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about obsession, ownership, and the dangerous collision of human emotion with rigid social hierarchies. Today, the Yancey plantation exists only in legend, in charred bricks and fallen beams, in documents and whispered stories. Visitors to the area sometimes claim to feel a presence, to hear arguing voices carried on the wind, or to catch a glimpse of pale women wandering the grounds at night. The story has become a cultural touchstone in the region, a haunting reminder of how desire and obsession, unchecked by reason, can consume everything. For Samuel, the lessons were personal. He survived, but he never forgot. His life became one of quiet endurance, marked by intelligence, courage, and memory. He told few people about the events that night, but for those who did hear, his story served as a warning. Obsession can destroy the strongest, the wealthiest, and the most powerful. It can ignite tragedy where none seems possible, leaving only ashes and sorrow behind. The tale of the Yancey twins also challenges how history remembers those who hold power. Caroline and Catherine were not villains in the traditional sense. They were women of wealth and social standing, trapped in their own desires and societal expectations. Yet the consequences of their obsession, amplified by the brutality of a society built on slavery, became catastrophic. The story forces us to examine the intersections of power, privilege, desire, and morality in a way that remains relevant today. May 23, 1852, will forever remain a date whispered in fear, the night the Yancey twins' obsession led to tragedy, the night 17 lives ended, and a plantation burned. For the descendants, for the historians, for those who hear the story now, it serves as a warning about human nature, the dangers of unchecked desire, and the fragile line between control and chaos. If you've been captivated by this story and want to uncover more forgotten and haunting moments in history, make sure to subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and share this story with others who love history as much as you do. Comment below and let us know where you're listening from. We want to see how far the legend of the Yancey twins has traveled. Remember, history often hides its darkest corners, but the truth, no matter how disturbing, demands to be told. The Yancey twins' story is a testament to obsession, desire, and the consequences of power unchecked. It is a night that should never be forgotten. This final part closes the story with historical reflection, emotional resonance, and a strong YouTube-friendly call to action.